imagine waking up 10,000 years ago. There is no ceiling above you, no glass in the window, no road outside, no electric glow leaking under a door, no phone charging beside your bed. You open your eyes to dawn itself, pale light spreading over reeds, river mist, and the dark shapes of people sleeping close enough that you can hear them breathe. The fire is still alive, though only just. Beneath the ash, the coals glow a dull red. Someone nearby is already awake, feeding it one twig at a time, patient and practiced, coaxing the morning back into the camp. A child turns in sleep, a dog lifts its head to the wind, and then settles again, somewhere out in the gray light. Birds begin calling over water you cannot yet see. This is your world. 10,000 years ago, humanity was living in more than one way at once. In many places, people still moved through the land as foragers had for countless generations, following animals, fish runs, ripening plants, seasonal water. But in some regions, something new had begun. People were staying longer, building more solid shelters, returning to the same ground again and again. Everywhere on earth, a human body still woke to cold air and morning hunger. Fires had to be kept alive. Children had to be watched. The sick had to be helped. The dead had to be remembered. Above every camp and settlement, the same stars still turned in a sky no city had yet dimmed. So, let us begin where every human story begins, with waking. Morning does not arrive all at once. It seeps into the world. First, the darkness softens. Then the edges of things begin to return. The curve of a sleeping shoulder, the shape of a basket by the fire, the ribs of a shelter frame, the glint of dampness on packed earth, the faint line of smoke drifting upward into cold air. If you live in a cave mouth or rock shelter, dawn reaches you indirectly, reflected off open ground outside, before it touches the stone around you. If you sleep in a hut of brush, hide, reed, or mud, the light comes through cracks and seams, thin and uncertain. If your people have begun living in something more permanent, one of the early settled communities of the Levant, perhaps, where houses could be circular or rectilinear and built to endure beyond a single season. Morning still begins the same way, by touching the body before the mind is ready. The air has changed. The fire has thinned. Sleep begins to loosen. There is no alarm. There is no hour. But there's rhythm. Human life 10,000 years ago was not shapeless. It was simply ruled by different forces. Light mattered. Temperature mattered. Wind mattered. Hunger mattered. The behavior of animals mattered. The nearness of water mattered. In mobile communities, the day might begin with listening for birds, insects, distant movement, rain on leaves. The cough of someone already awake, the small change in fire sound that tells you the embers are fading. In more settled places, the same dawn carried additional meanings: stored grain, or gathered foods to check, built space to maintain, walls or shared structures to move around within, neighbors close enough that morning was not just a family event, but a communal one. The early Holocene did not create one universal daily routine, but it did create a world in which more than one kind of routine now coexisted. For most of human history before this moment, your ancestors had lived by mobility. That does not mean wandering aimlessly. It means moving with intelligence, moving because fish runs shifted, because gazelle or deer changed their paths, because nuts ripened in one place and berries in another, because the waterline fell, because the season turned, because too many days in one place exhausted what could be gathered nearby. 10,000 years ago, that older logic still governed much of the earth, even where people had become semi sedentary or fully sedentary. They had emerged out of that far older inheritance of movement, and traces of it still shaped the way they slept, stored, watched, and woke. In the Levant, for example, archaeologists see a long transition from late hunter gatherer traditions, including the Natufian, into pre pottery Neolithic communities with increasingly permanent settlement and new subsistence patterns. It was not an overnight revolution, it was a threshold crossed in increments small enough that the people living through them may barely have recognized the scale of the change. So when you wake 10,000 years ago, you are waking inside history's hinge. Some mornings still belong almost entirely to the older human pattern. You rise in a temporary or seasonal camp. Your sleeping place is a practical nest. Grasses, reeds, leaves, skins, or mats laid over ground that would otherwise steal heat from your body. Other mornings belong to something newer. You rise near plastered floors, mud brick built walls, storage features, or communal architecture. At Jericho, by the ninth to 8th millennium BCE, a substantial permanent settlement already existed near the spring of Ain es Sultan, marked by communal construction and monumental features that point to a new scale of settled life. At Göbekli Tepe, hunter gatherers in Upper Mesopotamia raised monumental stone enclosures between about 9,600 and 8,200 BCE, suggesting not only technical ability, but social coordination and ritual significance before the full agricultural world we usually imagine. These places were unusual, not universal, but they matter because they prove that the morning of 10,000 years ago was no longer only the morning of nomads and camps. Still, for the body itself, dawn feels intimate before it feels historical. You notice cold first, not necessarily the killing cold of glacial winter, though in some places it could still be severe. The Holocene had begun, and the climate was warmer than the Ice Age world that preceded it. But warmer is not the same as comfortable. Morning air near a river can bite. A shelter that held heat through the darkest hours can feel suddenly inadequate once the fire drops and stillness settles. You pull a skin higher over your shoulder. You turn toward another sleeping body without fully waking. Human closeness is insulation before it is affection, though often it is both. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs, a child whimpers, then settles. A person who sleeps lightly rises first and goes to the embers. Fire is not just convenience. Here, it is continuity. It is heat carried from yesterday into today. In many camps and early settlements, that first act of the morning is not speaking. It is tending. Ash is shifted. Coals are exposed. Small fuel is added before larger fuel. Someone blows gently. Smoke thickens, then clears. Flame catches. In that brief brightening, the sleeping place becomes legible again. The baskets are where they were left. The scraper lies near the hide. The stone flakes from yesterday's toolwork still glitter in dust. A child's bead string, or shell pendant, or a small object clutched in sleep is found again in the same place, near the ribs or wrist. Prehistoric art and bodily adornment from this broader era remind us that even lives ruled by subsistence were not stripped of symbol or beauty. A person waking 10,000 years ago might rise not only beside tools and food, but beside beads, ochre, carved objects, ornament, and traces of ritual meaning woven into ordinary life. Then the listening begins. Has it rained? Is the wind wrong? Do the birds sound ordinary? This is not romantic sensitivity to nature, it is information processing. The human nervous system in such a world is trained by consequence. A silence where there should be dawn birds may mean a predator nearby. Thick air may mean rain before midday. A smell on the wind may mean game, strangers, damp ground, stagnant water, or smoke from another group. In a settled place, such signs matter somewhat differently than in a mobile camp, but they matter all the same. The environment is not background, it is an active participant in the day. You do not check the weather, you inhabit it from the first breath. And around you, the human circle wakes by degrees. Children often wake first, or all at once. That much has probably changed very little across millennia. A child who slept hard now rises quickly, suddenly alive to light and noise and movement, only to be hushed by an adult not yet ready for the day to begin at full volume. Infants must be fed. Older children drift toward the fire or toward whichever adult is already moving with purpose. In small scale societies, the child's world is rarely bounded by only two parents. Even in a camp of 20 or 30, there are many pairs of eyes, many hands, many temperaments. The details vary enormously by region and social structure, but one constant across early human communities is dependence on others, not only for food and defense, but for teaching, soothing, carrying, watching, and remembering. Morning is when that shared dependence becomes visible again after the vulnerability of sleep. Adults wake more slowly, not because they are lazy, because energy is a budget without clocks. The day is not broken into abstract units that must be conquered, but without abundance, the body still measures cost. Rising too quickly into cold wastes heat. Moving too soon without food wastes strength. A person may lie still for several minutes, not sleeping, simply waiting for warmth to return, for the fire to strengthen, for the mind to come fully back into the body. In a modern life, stillness is often treated as empty time. Here it is, transition, it is preparation. The world will ask things of you soon enough: carrying, scraping, walking, digging, lifting, tracking, cleaning, repairing, feeding, deciding. There is no prize for beginning badly. Somewhere in the camp, someone steps outside the sleeping cluster or beyond the doorway. This is one of the oldest human gestures: to check, to scan the ground, to feel the air, to know whether the world outside the sleeping place is the same world that existed when darkness fell. In a mobile camp, that may mean looking for tracks, disturbed brush, signs that scavengers came too close, dampness where bedding or stored goods must be moved, or simply reassurance that nothing essential changed in the night. In a more permanent settlement, the check expands. Are the built edges intact? Is the approach to the spring clear? Are neighboring households stirring? Did any shared feature, wall, ditch, enclosure, food store, work area, suffer from weather or intrusion? Permanent settlement does not eliminate uncertainty, it merely reorganizes it. This is why the morning of 10,000 years ago cannot be reduced to one image. There is no single answer because the human world was already plural. In one place, perhaps near the Jericho oasis, dawn falls on a large, settled community whose very existence hints at new forms of labor, storage, collective organization, and attachment to place. In another, perhaps across the Japanese archipelago, dawn falls on Yomon communities whose pottery and food practices point to a sophisticated hunting, gathering, and fishing life not neatly captured by the word primitive. In another, elsewhere entirely, morning still unfolds in smaller, more mobile groups shaped by wetlands, coasts, forests, steppe, or scrub. 10,000 years ago does not describe one civilization. It describes a planet full of humans carrying different answers to the same old problems. But if no single morning existed, a shared human feeling did, the feeling of return. Return from sleep into obligation, return from darkness into awareness of others, return into a world where nothing happens automatically. Fire does not keep itself alive. Children do not feed themselves. Tools do not repair themselves. Water does not walk into camp. And yet, for all that labor waiting just beyond the first light, this early hour is not only burden, it is also reassurance. The band is still here. The household is still here. The built wall still stands, or the shelter still held, or the spring still runs, or the fire still answers when fed. Everyone survived another night. For a few moments before hunger sharpens and the day branches into separate tasks, the group is briefly one body again, gathered around warmth between dreams and decisions. That may be the oldest form of morning comfort there is. Soon, voices grow clearer. A plan begins somewhere, loosely at first. Who goes where? Who stays? Who checks the water? Who carries the child? Who watches the older one? Who finishes scraping the hide? Who goes back to the stand of wild grain, the fig trees, the fish traps, the shell beds, the grazing path, the patch of roots not yet exhausted? And in those decisions, another great truth of life 10,000 years ago becomes visible. The day is never only about the individual, whether you live in a small mobile camp or a growing permanent settlement. Survival is social. Labor is distributed. Knowledge is unevenly held. Experience matters. Age matters. Place matters. That world may not have had bureaucracy, but it had structure. It may not have had clocks, but it had time. It may not have had markets, but it had exchange, dependence, obligation, memory, and expectation. For now, though, the day is still only opening. The fire has strengthened. The children are fully awake. The cold is retreating from the hands. Outside, the light has moved from gray to gold, and the first true question of morning is about to press itself forward as it always does. Not philosophy, not destiny, food. That is where the day turns next. The first true question of the morning is not abstract. It is not who you are. It is not what you dreamt. It is not what the future will bring. It is food. The mind returns to that question almost as quickly as the body returns to cold. Hunger is not yet desperate, at least not on an ordinary morning. It is simply there, waiting. A quiet pressure from the belly, a reminder that yesterday's labor only carried you this far, and today must begin where yesterday ended. But breakfast, in the modern sense, does not really exist. There is no fixed meal waiting in a kitchen, no custom that says food appears at the same hour every day, in the same familiar forms. What there is instead is availability, whatever remains from the night before, whatever can be warmed, softened, cracked, chewed, or shared, whatever the season allows, whatever skill has preserved, whatever the group can spore. If your people are still fully mobile, the morning meal may be little more than continuity, a strip of meat dried over smoke and saved from yesterday, a few nuts, some roasted roots, perhaps shellfish left from an evening collection, perhaps fish cold from the fire, perhaps nothing substantial at all until the day's work begins in earnest. If your community has begun staying longer in one place, perhaps near one of those early settlements where storage is starting to matter as much as gathering. The morning may already carry a faint new feeling, the presence of food not merely found but kept. Seeds, grain, dried figs, gathered legumes, caches of stored goods, protected against dampness, pests, strangers, and waste. That shift may sound small to us. It is not small. To store food is to push back against time. To wake with food still present from yesterday is to wake into a slightly different relationship with uncertainty. And yet, even then, nothing is automatic. Stored food still has to be protected, portioned, watched, and judged. Is it still good? Has it spoiled? Has moisture reached it? Did rodents find their way in? Does the group use it now or save it for a leaner week? The presence of storage does not remove hunger from life. It only makes hunger more complicated. Now, food is not only what can be found, it is also what can be measured, withheld, planned around, and argued over. In a more mobile camp, things are simpler, though not easier. The morning meal is often a continuation of yesterday's luck. Someone reaches toward a leather bag or woven basket. Someone cracks shells or nutshells with a smooth stone. Someone warms a root in ash, turning it carefully so the outside blackens while the inside softens. If there is dried meat, it is tough and fibrous, requiring patience and strong teeth. If there are gathered seeds, they may need grinding, and grinding is already labor before the day's larger labor has begun. If there are fish, they may be eaten in silence while the fire grows and plants form. Children drift close when food appears. They do not need to be summoned by theory. Their bodies know. And what people eat depends almost entirely on where they are. Near river valleys, marshes, and lakes, morning may taste of fish, waterfowl, reeds, roots, and seeds gathered from wet places. Near a coast, it may taste of shellfish, dried fish, seabirds, salt, and plants from dunes or estuaries. In woodland, it may be acorns, hazelnuts, berries in season, mushrooms, if knowledge permits, tubers, if the right people know where to dig. In open grassland, animal food may loom larger, but it is still rarely the only thing. The old myth that prehistoric people lived only on meat is the kind of error made by people who do not know how much of life is supported by what stays close to the ground. The older and truer human secret is dietary flexibility: roots, seeds, nuts, fruits, insects, eggs, shellfish, fish, small animals, large animals when luck allowed, and whatever could be rendered digestible through soaking, grinding, roasting, drying, pounding, or patience. That last part matters more than we often realize. Food is not only found, it is transformed. A bitter root becomes safe through heat. A hard seed becomes food through grinding. A fish becomes transportable through drying. A nut becomes shareable through cracking. Even the simplest meal is often the result of yesterday's knowledge, and this means that breakfast is never only eating, it is also instruction. An older woman shows a child how to split a shell without shattering what is inside. A man with scarred hands tests a stored bundle and discards the part touched by mold. An adolescent watches how long a root can sit in the edge of coals before it turns from nourishment to waste. A nursing mother chews something first to soften it before passing it to a very young child. Someone reminds someone else not to eat the first berries from a certain patch until they have fully turned. The world of 10,000 years ago contains no written cookbooks, but it contains memory, and memory is enough to build cuisine out of necessity, not cuisine in the modern sense of display or abundance. cuisine as accumulated survival, cuisine as inheritance, cuisine as a map of what the land can become once human hands and fire meet it. If your people are among those beginning to stay in one place longer, then mourning may also include a slightly different relationship to grain. Not yet bread in the familiar later sense, not yet fields in the fully agricultural world, but already the careful watching of stands of wild cereals, the harvesting of grasses, the gathering and storing of seeds, the experimental intimacy between human groups, and the plants that will eventually change human history. To collect seed heads and grind them into meal is laborious, dusty work. It asks time, steady rhythm, and often more than one pair of hands. The result is not always elegant, but it is dense, carryable, storable. It turns the landscape into reserve. It makes one good season linger longer into the next. That may be the single deepest change already beginning in this era. Humans are learning not only to move through abundance, but to capture it. Still, on most mornings, the meal is small. That is important to understand. Prehistoric life is not a continuous feast, but neither is it continuous starvation. Ordinary life sits between those extremes. People eat enough when they can. They save what travels well. They share when custom requires it, and custom usually requires it more than later societies imagine. Food in small communities is rarely a purely private possession. Success is too uneven for that. One day you find the shellfish, another day someone else does. One week a certain family returns with fish, another week they return with nothing. Group life only works when fortune circulates. That is true in mobile bands, and often still true in early settled communities, though settlement begins to create new tensions around ownership, storage, and access. A child learns those rules early without anyone having to speak them formally. Who gets fed first? Who gets the softest portion? Who is allowed to reach into the common basket? Who receives the choicest piece when a hunt has succeeded? Who gets the scraped bits from a grinding bowl? Who is trusted not to take too much? This is law before law, economy before money, ethics before philosophy. And because the morning meal is communal, it is also informational. While people eat, the day begins to take shape. Someone says the water is lower, someone says the birds were wrong near the reeds. Someone says the stand of roots farther north may be ready. Someone says tracks were seen at dusk. Someone says the stored grain should not be touched yet. Someone says a neighboring household seems short of food. Someone says a child is feverish and should not be taken far. None of this looks like strategy in the modern formal sense, but it is strategy all the same. Groups survive by distributing attention before they distribute labor, and then, once enough has been eaten to move, the mood shifts. No one has eaten for pleasure alone. No one has eaten enough to forget the rest of the day. The meal is less a conclusion than a threshold. It gives the body permission to rise into work. Hands are wiped, a basket is lifted, a cord is tested, a child is tied against a hip or back, a spear is checked, a carrying net is slung across the shoulders. Someone stays with the very old or the very young. Someone goes to the water. Someone goes to the reeds. Someone goes inland. Someone remains to grind, mend, or watch the fire. And like that, breakfast is over, not with the table cleared, not with dishes stacked, but with the whole human group unfolding into the landscape. The day has begun to spend itself, and most of what keeps everyone alive will not happen in the hunt, dramatic as that may one day be remembered. It will happen in the slower labor that begins now, the daily, knowledgeable, patient work of gathering, processing, carrying, and returning with what the land is willing to give. That is where the day truly starts. This is the part history often forgets because it is not loud. It does not lend itself to monuments. It rarely leaves behind heroic poses or famous names. It is not the spear frozen in the instant before impact. It is not the great animal collapsing in a storm of dust. It is not the single brilliant gesture by which survival is supposedly won. It is the work that happens almost every day: the walking, the carrying, the bending, the sorting, the scraping, the digging, the checking and rechecking, the endless attention to things that are small when seen alone and decisive when seen together. For most human beings 10,000 years ago, this was the real center of life. A group leaves camp after the morning meal, but not all in one direction. That is one of the first things to understand. A human community is not a single body marching toward one dramatic goal. It is many small movements at once, each shaped by age, strength, knowledge, need, season, and place. One cluster heads toward water, another toward a stand of grasses, another toward woodland where nuts or fruit may still be found, another toward the shell beds if the tide and coast permit. Someone remains at camp because labor also exists there: food to process, children to soothe, the fire to maintain, tools to finish, skins to stretch, storage to guard, the sick to watch. And everywhere the land is being read. The older human world was built on literacy of a different kind. A modern person walking through such a landscape might say, it is beautiful, or empty, or green, or dry. A person 10,000 years ago sees layers of use and consequence. Which slope keeps moisture longest? Which patch of soil suggests hidden tubers? Which bird behavior signals recent disturbance? Which reeds are young enough for weaving? Which route lets a loaded person return before darkness? Which patch was harvested too heavily last season and should be left alone? Which thicket shelters dangerous animals? Which trees fruit in sequence rather than all at once? Which place is safe for children to move through and which only for adults who know the signs? To call this foraging can make it sound casual. It is not casual, it is expertise distributed across ordinary life. Take gathering roots, for example, because roots are both humble and essential. A person who knows where to dig is carrying more than food knowledge. They carry risk knowledge. Some roots nourish, some irritate, some poison unless processed, some look similar but are not. In wetland zones, starchy plants may hide just below the surface where only a trained eye notices the pattern above. In drier country, edible underground storage organs may require knowing the right season, the right soil texture, the right flowering signal from a plant that no longer looks obviously edible. Digging sticks matter, baskets matter. The strength of the wrist matters, so does memory. An older woman may stop at what looks to an outsider like nothing at all. A patch of disturbed growth, a change in leaf pattern, a tiny rise in earth, and begin to dig. She is not guessing. She is seeing accumulated time. A child watching her sees only the root that comes out. But what she is really teaching is the landscape itself, how to notice, when to trust, when to doubt, how deep to dig, how much to take, when to leave the smaller ones so the patch returns. That last part may be one of the quiet foundations of human continuity. You do not strip a place if you intend to come back. Sustainable practice does not begin in modern ethics. It begins in repeated dependence. A group that takes everything leaves hunger for its future self. A group that learns to harvest without erasing may return next season to find life waiting where memory said it would be. And the same is true for nuts, fruits, seeds, shellfish, and small game. Every resource carries a technique. Every technique carries time. Gathering wild grain, for instance, can look deceptively simple from a distance. But to do it well means knowing when the seed heads are ready enough to yield, but not so ripe that half the value falls to the ground before collection. It means cutting or stripping in ways that do not waste effort. It means carrying heavy bundles back. It means threshing, winnowing, grinding, and protecting the result from moisture or animals. A few baskets of seed may hold extraordinary potential, but only if many stages of labor have already been accepted. This is why the old division between easy gathering and heroic hunting is misleading. Gathering is often harder than people imagine because it is cumulative labor. It does not end when the plant is in hand, it ends when the food is finally edible. Shellfish work the same way. The coast or estuary may look abundant, and sometimes it is, but abundance at the shoreline still requires timing, tidal awareness, safe footing, carrying strength, and the patience to sort, crack, pry, or heat what is gathered. Fish traps must be checked, nets repaired, shells opened. Good patches must be remembered, dangerous ones avoided. A coastal life is rich in protein and fat, yes, but only for people who understand how water rearranges opportunity from hour to hour, and the walking never really stops. That may be the single most universal texture of early human life. Locomotion as routine, not exercise, not pilgrimage, not leisure. Movement as maintenance. You walk because the water is there. You walk because the good reeds are there. You walk because yesterday's place is empty. You walk because the shell bed lies beyond the point. You walk because the traps were set downstream. You walk because carrying the child home on your back is easier than leaving them. You walk because a life without engines is a life in which distance is paid for in feet. But walking does not mean freedom in some abstract poetic sense. It means load. It means sun on the shoulders. It means carrying baskets, nets, firewood, skins, infants, tools, and the invisible weight of knowing the return must still be made after the body is tired. By midday, the day's labor is already written into the muscles. Legs ache. Fingers are cut or dirty. A strap has bitten into the forehead or shoulder. A child is restless. Someone is thirsty. Someone discovered that the expected patch yielded less than hoped. Someone else got lucky. This is what makes small communities work, not equal fortune, but shared adjustment. One person's full basket balances another person's lean one. One patch failed, another held. One task took longer, another less. And back in camp, labor has not paused. Those who stayed behind are not resting in idleness. They are shaping the return. Grain is being ground if there is grain to grind. Food left drying is being checked. Fires are being maintained at the right intensity. Hides are being turned or softened. Children too small to travel far are being occupied and protected. An elder may be working at a slower pace but with no less value. Sorting, remembering, advising, correcting, teaching. In a world without institutional storage of knowledge, older people are libraries with breath. Their bodies may carry less, but their minds carry the routes, seasons, warnings, cures, histories, quarrels, kin ties, and remembered mistakes that keep a group from repeating disaster. This is also where human dependence becomes visible in its fullest form. Nobody, truly nobody, is self made in such a world. The able bodied adult who returns with a heavy load did not do so alone. Someone kept the child. Someone remembered the place. Someone made the basket. Someone shaped the digging stick or net weight. Someone preserved the earlier food that made the journey possible. Someone taught the route years ago. Someone else will later process the return into something edible. The older modern fantasy of rugged prehistoric individualism is exactly backward. Life 10,000 years ago rewards skill. Yes, but skill without community is brittle. The day lengthens, the sun shifts, and little by little the groups begin to turn homeward, not because some clock demands it, but because the body knows how late labor can become dangerous. The load feels heavier on the return. A basket of roots that seemed manageable now presses into the spine. A fish catch slicks the arms and clothes. Seeds chafe through woven fibers. Children who once rode quietly now squirm and cry from heat or hunger. Still, there is satisfaction in the return when the work has gone well. Not triumph, perhaps, not yet, but solidity. You are walking back with something. Food is becoming visible again, not as hope, but as weight in hand. And because most human days depend more on this kind of labor than on the rare drama of a successful large hunt, this is what ordinary life truly rests on: the steady inflow of gathered calories, the constant maintenance of small abundance, the refusal to waste what is near in pursuit of fantasies of glory. A community that survives is usually not the one that dreams most dramatically. It is the one that knows how to return again and again with enough. So when evening stories later celebrate the animal brought down after great danger, they are not false. They are simply incomplete, because the human day is being held together right now by the quieter heroism of people carrying food home. And yet sometimes the hunters do not return empty handed. Sometimes the dramatic story really does happen. Sometimes the day changes its tempo entirely, and when it does, the whole camp feels it. Most days do not belong to the hunt. That is precisely what gives the hunt its power. If large animal hunting happened every morning with clean success every evening, it would not carry the emotional charge it later held in memory, story, and identity. It would be ordinary, it would blur into routine. Instead, what makes it memorable is uncertainty. Some hunts fail. Some never begin because the signs are wrong. Some lead nowhere. Some injure the hunter more than the prey. Some end in a body brought home and food enough for many. Most exist first as hope, then as tracking, then as silence. But when the hunt does happen, the whole social atmosphere shifts. The day becomes more focused, more taut. The camp senses it early, even before anyone speaks. A track was seen near water. A herd moved through during dusk. The wind holds steady from the right direction. The ground is soft enough to read. The people most suited to go are uninjured, available, alert. And so a small group prepares. Hunts depends on place, culture, body, skill, and circumstance. Broad patterns may exist, but prehistoric life rarely obeys neat rules as cleanly as later imagination demands. What matters most is not ideology, but competence. The hunt asks for particular things: endurance, coordination, restraint, courage, knowledge of animal behavior, and the ability to stay inside a plan even when adrenaline begins to rise. It is not just the realm of strength, it is the realm of control. Weapons are checked before departure. The spear shaft is run through the hand to feel for weakness. A point is tightened or replaced. Cordage is tested. A throwing stick, or atlatl, where such technology exists, is handled with care. A stone blade is tucked close for butchery if luck comes, and then the hunters go, not charging into legend, but moving into evidence. This is the first great truth of hunting. Most of it is reading. A fresh track is not just a sign that an animal passed, it is a sentence written in fragments. How old is it? How fast was the animal moving? Was it alone? Was it alarmed, heavy, wounded, part of a herd, headed toward water or away from it? Even dung, disturbed earth, snapped reeds, rubbed bark, or the silence of certain birds can enter the reading. The landscape becomes a page again, but now one written in motion and vulnerability. In the older human world, the best hunters are often the best interpreters. Physical force matters only after comprehension. The group follows in a rhythm that would frustrate anyone expecting speed. This is not a chase, at least not yet. It is measured movement, periods of walking, pauses, gestures, quiet decisions. The body is being conserved because the day may lengthen far beyond the first hopeful sign. No one wants to waste strength in the wrong direction. To hunt badly is not merely to fail. It is to spend calories and attention that may be needed later for survival. Hours may pass this way. That is another thing modern imagination often resists. Hunting, especially before projectiles became overwhelmingly decisive, is full of waiting, watching, and closing distance by patience rather than dramatic pursuit. Sometimes the group circles ahead. Sometimes it tries to place itself between animal and water. Sometimes it studies the terrain and realizes the land itself may do more of the work. A bottleneck, a soft patch of ground, a ravine, a place where herd behavior becomes predictable. And still, there is no guarantee. Animals are not passive participants in human history. They are alert, strong, practiced survivors in their own right. A deer does not wish to become memory. A boar can kill. An aurochs or wild cattle can maim. Herd animals scatter in confusion precisely when the human plan requires order. Wind shifts, scent travels. One badly timed step changes everything. The day that looked promising in camp becomes a day of footprints leading nowhere. That failure matters, because failure is common enough that the social world has to absorb it without collapsing into blame every time. A hunting culture that treats every empty-handed return as shame would devour itself. Instead, most small communities learn to hold failure inside larger patterns. You tried. The wind was wrong. The animal heard. The ground opened. Tomorrow there are roots. Tomorrow there are fish. Tomorrow there are traps to check. The daily steadiness of gathered food is what makes hunting uncertainty tolerable. But now and then the day turns. Now and then the hunters see the animal not merely as sign, but as presence. The moment always arrives with a tightening of perception. Distance becomes shape. Shape becomes species. Species becomes possibility. A body half hidden in brush. A cluster moving beyond reeds. A lone animal separated from others. Heads lifting, turning, muscles ready. The hunters flatten or slow, or spread according to the plan, if there is still a plan. No one is speaking now. Everything important happens through breath, eyes, small movements of hand and shoulders. The body understands risk at such moments with unusual clarity. A missed throw is not only lost opportunity, it may be the difference between eating and not eating. A wounded animal may run farther than the group can afford to follow. A badly judged approach may turn prey into danger. Ancient hunting demands not bravado, but timing. To get close enough without being seen, to strike cleanly enough that the animal does not vanish into hours more effort, to remain coordinated in the brief flood of fear and hope. Then the throw, or thrust, or rush finally comes. And because so much of hunting is preparation, the decisive moment is often astonishingly short, a burst of movement, hooves or feet pounding earth, a spear released, a shout at last, then confusion, dust, broken brush, breath like fire in the lungs. The animal either goes down or it does not. If it does not, the story changes immediately. Now the group reads blood, broken, stems, signs of weakness, direction of escape. The hunt becomes endurance again. If the wound is good, time may be on the hunter's side. If the wound is poor, time turns against them. Hours may follow. Bodies tire. Light changes. The hunters decide whether continuation is wisdom or waste. If the animal does go down, there is usually no wild celebration in the first instant. The first response is caution. A wounded animal can rise. A body that looks finished can still break a leg, gut, or skull with one last force of instinct. Only when death is certain does the atmosphere alter from tension to something broader, deeper, more communal, even before the camp knows. Relief enters first, then calculation, then sometimes gratitude or ritual acknowledgement, however that culture frames it. We cannot know every word spoken or every gesture made in those moments, but it is difficult to imagine people so dependent on animals not feeling the gravity of the exchange. Food has died into human possibility. That fact has weight. Then butchery begins. This is a craft as exact as tool making, where to cut, how to skin without losing usable hide, how to remove meat in ways that preserve what matters most, which organs must be eaten or processed quickly, which bones to save whole for later marrow, which sinews will become binding material, which parts can be carried first if the camp is far. Everything has consequence. Waste is not only morally unpleasant in such a world, it is materially foolish. And then the practical problem appears. Success is heavy. The great irony of the successful hunt is that it creates work before it creates rest. Large animals become a crisis of transport. A body that fed itself well in life now resists being carried in death. If camp is close, runners may be sent. If camp is distant, some meat may be processed on site. Fires may be kindled to ward off scavengers. The group works quickly not only because daylight moves, but because the land also contains others who know how to find flesh. Wolves, hyenas, big cats, birds. Human beings are never alone in recognizing opportunity. When the kill finally reaches camp, then at last the emotional meaning widens. Children see it first, perhaps, or smell it. Voices change, people gather. The return is not only food, it is proof of competence, luck, endurance, cooperation, and the temporary abundance that permits the entire social world to soften. There will be better eating tonight. There may be grease on faces, bones for cracking, stories for later, perhaps even small prestige for those who struck true or tracked well. But the deeper truth remains the same. The successful hunt matters precisely because it is not the whole story. It enters a human economy already made possible by daily labor, sharing customs, tool care, fire, and gathered food. What the hunt adds is concentration, a sudden density of calories, a burst of status, a narrative the group can replay, perhaps even a ritual, because the hunt is not only meat, it is memory in dramatic form. Children listen differently when a story begins with danger and ends with food. Elders correct the details, reminding the younger what truly happened and what nearly failed. The animal becomes more than a body, it becomes teaching where the hunter stood, how the wind turned, why patience mattered, why foolish haste nearly ruined the effort, why one person's courage only mattered because others held the plan together. And all of this is why hunting occupies so much space in later imagination, even if it occupied less of the daily calendar than quieter labor did. The hunt condenses everything humans value in dangerous environments: skill, nerve, luck, cooperation, technology, and the transformation of uncertainty into life. But by the next morning, the glamour is already fading back into maintenance. The meat must be dried or cooked. The hide must be scraped. The bones must be cracked. The tools dulled by butchery must be repaired. The story may last for years. The labor begins immediately. And that labor leads us to another world just as essential as food itself: the world of hands, craft, and material knowledge without which no human day could continue. A human life 10,000 years ago is made possible by things that have already been made. That sounds obvious, but it is easy to forget. Before the root is dug, the digging stick exists. Before the fish is caught, the net exists. Before the meat is dried, the rack exists. Before the child is carried, the sling exists. Before the fire warms, someone has saved coals, gathered fuel, and learned how not to lose flame to wind or rain. The day does not start from zero. It starts from the accumulated labor of hands. This is why camps and early settlements often sound like workshops by late morning, not loud in the industrial sense, but textured with repeated making: the click of stone on stone, the scrape of a hide being cleaned, the twisting of fiber, the soft thud of grinding, the crack of small wood being sorted by size and dryness, the hiss of wetness near heat, the murmur of correction from one generation to another. Craft is not a side activity here. Craft is survival slowed down enough to become visible. Take stone first, because stone is memory made durable. A flake struck well from a core may hold an edge more useful than many later people would guess from its simplicity. But simplicity in result does not mean simplicity in production. Good stone has to be found or traded for. It must be recognized before it is worked. The maker must know not only how to hit, but where, with what force, at what angle, in what sequence. A poor strike can waste material. A good strike turns possibility into a blade, scraper, point, burin, drill, or all, even small debris on the ground. The scatter of flakes around a work area is evidence of thought, not accident. Archaeologists later read such fields of waste as maps of human action. In the moment, they are simply the natural snowfall of skill. A person working stone is rarely only working stone. A child hovers nearby. An elder watches and sometimes interrupts. Someone brings a new core from elsewhere. Someone tests an edge on hide. Someone asks for a quick resharpening of a point dulled in butchery. Knowledge moves through the work like heat through embers. Nobody needs a classroom to understand that good tools come from practiced hands. In communities where survival depends on material competence, craft authority carries real social weight. The best maker is not merely useful, they are trusted. And stone is only one layer. Bone and antler matter too. They bend where stone shatters. They can be shaped into needles, awls, barbs, points, ornaments, fishhooks, smoothers, and handles. To work them asks different patience. Less percussion, more scraping, drilling, smoothing, polishing. The maker must feel material resistance differently. Antler especially contains hidden strength. properly shaped, it becomes a weapon or implement that lives through impact stone would not survive intact. Bone needles, once made, transform clothing. Suddenly, seams can become tighter, garments better fitted, cold more negotiable. It is one thing to drape a hide, it is another to sew a covering shaped to body and weather. Clothing matters more than later romantic fantasies allow. Early humans are not simply close to nature in a picturesque sense, they are exposed to it. Exposure kills. Rain rots the body's heat, wind steals it. Cold enters through feet, shoulders, open seams, wet layers. To scrape a hide clean, soften it, smoke it, treat it, cut it, and stitch it into something usable is a massive investment of time. A well made garment is not vanity alone, it is shelter carried on the body, it is mobility made possible. It is the difference between enduring morning cold and succumbing to it. And yet, even here, utility does not exclude beauty. That is one of the recurring surprises of prehistory. People decorate useful things. A handle may be shaped more elegantly than necessity demands. A pendant may be drilled not because it feeds anyone, but because identity also matters. A child's garment may be sewn with care beyond mere warmth because affection can inhabit material form. A bead string may rattle lightly at the wrist of someone carrying water because even in difficult worlds, humans do not abandon adornment. They expand into it. Meanwhile, fire, that constant companion of the waking hour, remains a craft in its own right. It is easy for modern people to think of fire as a fact. You turn something on, heat appears. But in the early Holocene, as in the long ages before it, fire is relationship. It must be kept, protected, fed, and understood. Not every wood burns the same. Not every stage of flame suits the same task. Thin, dry fuel wakes sleeping embers. Thicker wood sustains heat. Smokier fuel preserves meat or drives insects away. A low bed of coals softens roots or dries damp material without scorching it. A hotter flame hardens a point or transforms stone under certain conditions. Fire is chemistry without books, physics without formulas, inheritance without written theory. Children likely grow up with fire awareness almost before language fully settles in them. Come too close and you burn, feed too much and you smother, neglect it and mourning begins with difficulty. Respect and familiarity fuse. The fire becomes center, not only because it is useful, but because so much life gathers around the tasks it makes possible. Then there are baskets, cordage, mats, slings, nets, and carrying devices, with the technologies that rarely get cinematic respect because they are too quiet and too often associated with domestic labor rather than heroic action. But without them, the human world shrinks immediately. How do you bring 10 roots home instead of 2? Basket. How do you carry a child while keeping hands free? Sling. How do you make repeated small catches more efficient than individual grabs? Net. How do you tie, bind, repair, suspend, secure, lash, dry, or store? Cordage. Fiber work may be among the most underappreciated revolutions in human history. Plant fibers twisted into string and string turned into structure allow a new level of control over material life. Nets expand what water can yield. Cord binds points to shafts. Loops and straps turn human bodies into transport systems. Woven containers change the scale on which gathered food can be moved and kept. To make cordage is repetitive, intimate work. Fingers twist, roll, tighten, judge, tension. It looks slow because it is slow, but every length made becomes future possibility. The same is true of grinding. If there is grain, seed, nut meal, pigment, or anything else that needs breaking down, grinding stones come into play. And these are not glamorous tools. They are heavy, often stationary, and associated with repetition bordering on fatigue. But repetition is exactly the point. A grinding stone turns tiny hard fragments into something the body can digest more fully. It turns scattered seed into concentrated nutrition. It turns ochre into powder that can mark skin, wall, object, or dead. It turns the hand's persistence into a surplus of use. By afternoon, the camp is full of half finished things: a hide still damp at one edge, a spear shaft leaning to cure straight, a basket being patched where last week's load wore through, a bone point awaiting final sharpening, a mat laid in sun, a knot not yet tied, a child's toy or miniature implement imitating adult work, because imitation is how training hides itself inside play. That last point matters. Children in such a world are not excluded from material culture until some formal age of apprenticeship. They are inside it from the beginning. They watch, touch, fail, repeat, and gradually become competent. A little digging stick, a small basket, a blunt flake, a toy spear. These are not just amusements, they are rehearsals of adulthood. The line between play and training is thin because life itself does not separate them sharply. And through all this, one deeper principle remains visible. Technology does not alienate people from nature here. It binds them more intricately to it. A basket is made from reeds, grasses, bark, or fiber known in season. A point depends on stone from a known source. Cordage depends on the tensile habits of certain plants. Hidework depends on animals, weather, smoke, and fat. Every tool is a meeting between human intention and environmental intimacy. That is why the material world of 10,000 years ago is so revealing. It shows us a humanity that survives not by overpowering the world, but by studying it until partnership becomes possible. And because all that craft happens in proximity, beside fire, within camps, under eyes of kin, it also tells us something about society itself. Skill is never only practical, it is social currency. The trusted maker, the best leather worker, the patient net mender, the person who knows how to keep smoke low and coals alive through bad weather. These people hold communities together in ways a simple list of tasks can never fully capture. The day, therefore, is not divided between real work and making things. Making things is real work. Making things is how tomorrow becomes survivable. And because tomorrow will also belong to children, elders, parents, siblings, partners, and all the shifting tensions of small group life, the human story now moves from hands to relationships to the living circle in which all this labor takes meaning. No one lives alone 10,000 years ago. Even solitude, when it happens inside remembered company. This may be the first thing modern people underestimate when they imagine prehistoric life. They think of isolation because they imagine open land and low population. They picture scattered bodies moving through vast landscapes with no one near. But what matters in daily experience is not population density on a continental scale. It is the size of the social world immediately around you, and in that sense, most human beings then lived extraordinarily close to other people. You slept near them, worked near them, ate near them, heard them breathe, cough, snore, whisper, argue, laugh, groan in pain, soothe children, tell old stories, and wake in the dark to tend fire. Your life was not defined by anonymous crowds. It was defined by known faces. That creates a different kind of pressure and a different kind of comfort. In a group of 20, 30, perhaps 40, or more, depending on setting. Everyone matters in a way difficult for later large societies to reproduce. The generous person is known as generous not by a reputation spread through institutions, but by repeated direct experience. The selfish person cannot hide easily. The skilled person's value is visible daily. The unreliable person's cost is remembered. Social life becomes intense not because it is elaborate, but because it is inescapably personal. Children grow up inside that intensity. A child's world is not just mother and father in the narrow later sense, it is a whole field of adults, older siblings, cousins, grandparents, affins, and bonded non kin whose attention overlaps. One person carries the child at dawn, another distracts them at midday, another scolds them near fire, another teaches them a bird call, another shares a piece of food, another tells the story they beg to hear again. This is not utopian abundance. Adults may be tired, annoyed, distracted, grieving, or harsh, but the structural fact remains. Children are raised in a web. That web is a survival technology. If one caregiver is injured, others remain. If one adult is out all day, the child is still watched. If food must be gathered, infants and toddlers are not simply abandoned to bad luck. Cooperative care may be one of the most decisive human adaptations, and in small communities it feels less like policy than inevitability. No one announces it, the day simply makes it true. This also means that education begins immediately and never formally starts, because it never formally stops. A child learns not through abstraction first, but through nearness, how to move around fire, how to distinguish a joke from a warning in an elder's voice, how to watch adults' faces when strangers approach, how to carry little before carrying much, how to recognize approval, impatience, danger, and affection, how to mimic useful actions long before they can perform them effectively. A small child may spend an hour dropping pebbles into a basket or tracing lines in ash while nearby adults work. To modern eyes, this can look like random play, but play in such a world is saturated with eventual function. Little hands practice grip, little legs practice balance, little social minds practice negotiation, imitation, daring, apology, alliance, and boundary testing. The child is not being prepared for life later. The child is already inside life. Adolescence changes the balance again. By then, the body begins to matter differently. Strength grows, endurance grows. Responsibilities become real rather than imitative. A girl or boy may begin accompanying adults farther from camp. Skills deepen from observation into contribution. They are sent to fetch, carry, gather, watch, and perhaps hunt small game, perhaps learn routes, water knowledge, plant cycles, animal behavior, tool finishing, grinding, cooking, stitching, or the thousand unspectacular competencies without which adulthood would collapse. Adolescence is also when society starts pressing more heavily on desire, status, rivalry, and belonging. Who is brave? Who is reckless? Who is lazy? Who learns quickly? Who flirts badly? Who is admired? Who draws laughter? Who sulks? All of this matters in a small social world because there is no broad impersonal field into which identity can disappear. A young person becomes visible early. Their habits are remembered, their strengths are noted. Their mistakes are not just private embarrassments, they enter collective memory. This is where gossip becomes essential. Modern people hear the word and think pettiness. But in very small societies, gossip is governance. It is information about reliability, fairness, generosity, sexual tension, food sharing, conflict, and character. It disciplines behavior without courts. It protects the weak, at least imperfectly. It exposes hidden selfishness. It allows a group to talk about danger in social form before danger becomes fatal. A person who repeatedly takes too much, lies about contribution, or provokes conflict is not primarily punished by law. They are surrounded by narrative. Their behavior is talked about. They become known. That knowledge shapes who trusts them, who shares with them, who sleeps near them, who follows their advice, who intervenes when they are in trouble. For bigger tensions, there are often mediating people. Elders matter here profoundly, not because they are always gentle or wise. Real older people, then, as now, vary enormously, but because memory has value. Someone who has lived through hard winters, flood years, dangerous migrations, earlier quarrels, deaths in childbirth, starvation scares, unexpected abundance, and the consequences of bad decisions becomes a repository of precedent. Their body may no longer outrun youth, but their knowledge can prevent the group from making expensive mistakes. In a world without archives, elders are archives. Lose one suddenly, and an entire library vanishes. This also changes the meaning of aging. An old back that cannot carry heavy loads may still teach hide work, food processing, childcare, medicinal knowledge, roots, ritual, weather reading, and social memory. An elder may not walk the farthest, but they may remember where to go when the usual place fails. They may know which plant eases fever, which season turned bad without warning 30 years earlier, which neighboring group can be trusted in scarcity and which can not. Practical memory stretches beyond mere fact into emotional management too. They have seen quarrels almost split the band before. They know how pride sounds before it becomes violence. They know when to joke, when to scold, when to sit between angry adults and slow the rhythm down until the group can keep itself intact. Because that is one constant beneath everything. Fission is dangerous. A small group cannot afford every serious conflict to become permanent fracture. Too much division weakens defense, food sharing, childcare, knowledge distribution, and marriage possibilities. So societies under such conditions often become skilled at indirect correction. Humor softens criticism. Teasing marks bad behavior before condemnation becomes necessary. Songs, stories, or oblique remarks may do the work of accusation without forcing open humiliation. Not every conflict is resolved well. Some people are expelled, leave, or join others. But the structure of life quietly favors reconciliation where possible because survival favors it. And what of partnerships? Here too, the modern hunger for one timeless natural model misleads. Human pair bonding, sexual behavior, household structure, and child rearing arrangements likely varied enormously by region and custom. What mattered was not adherence to a single later family ideology, but workable management of resources, children, jealousy, kin ties, and alliance. Some pair bonds may have been stable for years or life, others more fluid. Some households may have centered strongly on biological parents, others on broader cooperative clusters. The deeper truth is less about form than about dependency. Children needed care, adults needed help. Desires created tension, food required sharing. Custom emerged to hold these forces in something like balance, and beyond the group itself lay other groups. This is crucial. A band or settlement is not the whole human world. It is one node in a wider network of exchange, marriage, rivalry, information, and occasional ceremonial gathering. People move between communities by birth, partnership, necessity, or alliance. Materials travel, too. A shell from one landscape appears in another. A stone source known far away becomes present in a tool. Ideas travel with bodies, a better point design, a stronger resin mix, a ritual gesture, a new food processing trick. Humanity 10,000 years ago is not globally connected in any modern sense, but neither is it composed of sealed bubbles. Knowledge spreads by encounter. That means every child also grows up under the possibility of elsewhere, other people, other ways, other accents, other food, other marriage partners, other threats, other opportunities. And this wider horizon helps prevent the small social world from becoming genetically and culturally closed in on itself. The human circle may feel intimate, but it is porous at the edges. All of that makes death hit harder. When someone dies in such a community, the absence is not administrative, it is immediate. The sleeping arrangement changes, labor has to be redistributed, a voice disappears from everyday sound. A child loses a carrier, teacher, or comforter. A skill may vanish if not well passed on. Grief, therefore, is never just feeling, it is structural disturbance. And yet, the archaeological record suggests again and again that death was not treated casually. Bodies were buried carefully, sometimes with pigment, goods, or intentional placement. The dead were remembered in ways that imply meaning beyond disposal. Human communities this early were already telling themselves that a life did not simply end as waste. The exact stories differ, but the need for stories does not. That need comes from the same place as kinship itself. No one lives alone, and no one dies as if they had. By late afternoon, all these relationships return visibly to center. The gatherers come back. The toolmaker pauses. The child runs to whoever has returned. The elder comments on the load. The nursing mother sits. The adolescent seeks approval with a fish or bundle or simply news. The day's labor enters the social circle and becomes part of the shared account of who contributed, who needs help, who is tired, who is ill, who is admired, who is troublesome, who is loved. That is what a human community is at this scale. Not an abstract society, but a daily reckoning of mutual dependence. And somewhere within that reckoning, another great change is beginning to gather force. The possibility that some people, some groups, might stop moving so much, might begin to treat one place not merely as camp, but as home in a fuller and more demanding sense. For most of human existence, movement was wisdom. If resources thinned, you moved. If water shifted, you moved. If the season changed, the herds turned, the fish ran, the nuts ripened elsewhere, or the ground near camp had been too thoroughly worked, you moved. Movement was not failure to settle. Movement was adaptation. The land itself asked for it. But 10,000 years ago, in some places, movement began to loosen its grip. Not everywhere, not all at once, and not in a clean line towards civilization, as if people were simply upgrading a lifestyle. The real change was messier and more human than that. Some environments made longer stay worthwhile. Some wild resources became predictable enough to anchor communities for extended periods. Some groups learned to store food more effectively. Some began returning to the same place so regularly that the place itself changed under repeated occupation. Some began building structures that made less sense if you intended to leave soon. Some started watching particular plants with unusual attention. Some may have managed animals at the margins before anyone would later call it husbandry. And in those small decisions repeated across years, history began to tip, to stay is not just to remain physically present, it is to reorganize daily life around the possibility of tomorrow in the same place. That changes everything. A mobile camp must be light enough in spirit, if not always in material, to be left. A more settled place begins to accumulate. Storage pits, grinding stones too heavy to move casually, walls, shared work areas, rebuilt floors, trash zones, boundaries, memory layered physically, not just socially. Now the place remembers with you. Perhaps nowhere does this early transformation feel more striking than in the Levant and nearby regions, where late foraging traditions gave way gradually to increasingly permanent settlements. But again, the deepest truth is not geographical, it is experiential. What did it feel like to be among the first humans for whom home meant not just the people around the fire, but the ground under the floor? It must have felt both promising and dangerous. Promising, because staying lets a community invest more deeply. A wall can be repaired instead of abandoned. A storage feature can be built to last. Food processing becomes more efficient if tools remain in place. Waste can be managed. Shared structures create larger forms of cooperation. Children grow in a geography they know not merely as root, but as center. Memory becomes anchored to built space. Here your mother ground grain. Here your grandfather sat in winter. Here the dead were laid. Here the spring ran when other streams failed. Here we returned again and again until return stopped being the right word. But danger also comes with staying. To remain means to attract notice. Others know where you are. Predators may learn the smell of your refuse, your food, your animals, if animals are present. Rodents, pests, mold, and disease gain more opportunity when humans and their waste and stores remain concentrated. Conflict changes too. A mobile group can leave tension behind more easily than a settled one can defend a built place it values. And emotionally, staying binds human beings to loss in a new way. If one place becomes ours, then damage to that place hurts differently. Fire, flood, raid, collapse, crop failure, pest invasion, and drought do not just interrupt the route, they threaten investment. Perhaps that is why early settlement should never be imagined as an obvious improvement, recognized instantly by everyone. Staying solves some problems by creating others. Still, morning in such a community is already different. You wake not just among objects that can be packed, but among structures that remain. Whether you leave or not, the wall stands where it stood yesterday. The same threshold is crossed, the same floor has to be swept or repaired, the same storage must be checked, the same neighboring household is close by. Sound behaves differently in built spaces, smell does too. Settled life concentrates presence. Human voices, ash, food, odors, dampness, children's noise, animal traces all begin to accumulate into atmosphere. And labor changes accordingly. If mobility once required strategic lightness, settlement invites maintenance. Walls crack, floors wear down, roofs leak, storage pits need sealing, refuse must be moved. Built environments make new chores the land alone never demanded. They also reshape social relations. In a mobile band, access to space is often relatively fluid because space itself is temporary. In a settled community, space hardens. This sleeping area, this hearth, this wall, this storage, this threshold, this courtyard, this work zone, all begin to carry expectations. Boundaries need not yet be legal property in a later sense to become socially real. A person may know where they belong, where they should not casually take, where another household store begins, where shared use ends and private claim begins. This shift may be one of the deepest revolutions concealed in daily life. Settlement teaches humans to think territorially, not just outward toward landscape, but inward toward domestic space. Food, too, changes under this new logic. Gathering still matters enormously. Hunting still matters. Fishing still matters. But the possibility of storage and cultivation tilts attention toward delayed return. More time may be spent processing seeds because those seeds now matter not only as today's meal, but as tomorrow's reserve. More effort may go into keeping rodents away because theft by animals now threatens not a few scattered scraps, but a concentrated future. More labor may be invested in tools designed for repeated grain processing because that repetition has become central. The body's work turns from pure immediacy toward planning. That may sound simple, it is not. Planning changes time. A fully mobile forager also plans, of course, routes, seasons, expected returns, but more settled life plans through matter. Stored food is embodied future. Cultivated land is future underfoot. A planted or protected patch is a wager on your own continued presence. Suddenly, a human group is not just reading the landscape, it is beginning quietly to write back into it, and that affects identity. Who are you if you belong not just to kin, but to place? Who are you if your dead are buried here? Your food is stored here, your labor is sunk into walls here. Who are you if strangers arrive and must now be received at your center rather than encountered on neutral ground? Hospitality changes, conflict changes, marriage patterns may change, exchange changes. Leadership may begin to shift too because organizing larger labor around fixed structures asks for coordination that mobile life distributes differently. Not yet kings, not yet states, but already the seeds of social scale are present. This does not mean settled life becomes joyless administration. Far from it, staying also makes new forms of intimacy possible. Familiar paths, familiar work surfaces, shared architecture, repeated gathering in the same communal spaces. The child who grows up in such a place acquires a different kind of memory from one raised entirely on movement. Their world has corners that last. Their sense of safety may root itself in walls as well as people. Their stories may begin in this house, or by that tower, or near the spring, instead of only when we were camped by the river that season. But the older human life does not vanish overnight. It remains nearby in habit, toolkit, memory, and necessity. Even settled communities still move outward daily for resources. Even they may relocate if conditions fail badly enough. And many, many people across the earth continue living more mobile lives with no sense of being behind history, because they are not behind history. They are history. That is the point worth holding here. 10,000 years ago is not a neat ladder with everyone on different rungs, and it is a world of overlapping experiments in being human. Some stay, some move, some do both seasonally, some store intensely without full cultivation, some cultivate while still hunting and gathering heavily. Some build ritual spaces more permanent than their houses. Some make pottery without farming. Some practice forms of sedentism that later historians once thought impossible without agriculture. Human life is proving itself more flexible than any single theory can easily contain. And in the middle of all this, ordinary feelings remain stubbornly familiar. A woman checks a food store and worries whether it will last. A man repairs a wall while a child follows behind, asking questions. Someone resents the extra work that built life demands. Someone else feels relief that a tonight's sleep will happen under a familiar roof. An elder runs a hand across a plastered surface and remembers when this place was only open ground. A teenager dreams of another community somewhere beyond the horizon. A dog sleeps in the same patch of shade as yesterday. A baby falls asleep against a chest while grinding continues nearby. History's great transitions are always built out of moments that small. And when the work of staying is done for the day, when the floors are tended, the grain ground, the walls checked, the stores covered, the children gathered back inside the social center, Mikai, people still want what humans always want after labor: rest, laughter, adornment, music, story, the pleasure of simply being together without immediate threat pressing on the next movement. Which means that even at the threshold of agriculture, even at the edge of settlement and social transformation, life is not all utility. It still makes room for beauty. If you only study survival from a distance, you might think the day ends when the labor ends. Food found, tools repaired, children accounted for, fire secured, shelter checked. What else is there? There is everything else. This may be one of the great corrections prehistory offers the modern imagination. Humans in difficult worlds do not stop wanting delight. They do not postpone beauty until after abundance has been achieved once and for all. They do not wait for civilization to invent leisure. They carve it, sing it, paint it, drum it, joke it, wear it, and tell it into being wherever time opens even a little. And time does open, not always generously, not equally, not in every season. Hard years compress life. Illness steals it. Long travel steals it. But on ordinary days, after the essential labor has been done, or at least paused, the camp or settlement changes tone. Bodies uncoil, hands keep moving perhaps, but now around softer tasks. Voices lengthen. The urgency leaves the air. The fire becomes center, not of necessity alone, but of company. Children are first to make that visible. They play even when adults think they are only learning. They run, chase, wrestle, imitate, hide, throw, climb, test each other's courage, squabble over small objects, invent rules, forget them, reinvent them. A stick becomes a spear, a smooth stone becomes a prize. A patch of ground becomes another world. Adults half watch, intervening when danger nears, but otherwise allowing the swirl because play is not empty. It trains bodies and social minds. It teaches balance, rhythm, timing, alliance, argument, repair. A child pretending to stalk another child across the edge of camp is not only amusing themselves, they are rehearsing attention. Adults play too, though later historians sometimes try to deny it. Jokes erupt in work, teasing marks affection and correction at once. Mock competitions arise. Someone boasts and is challenged. Someone exaggerates the day's hunt and is immediately corrected by laughter. Pebbles, bones, markings in dirt, carved counters, tossed objects. The line between game and social ritual can be thin. We often do not know the exact rules of prehistoric amusements, but the impulse is unmistakably human. Minds seek challenge. Hands seek play. Groups seek forms of tension that do not destroy them. Then there is grooming. To modern people, grooming may seem private or trivial, but in small communities, it is intimate social maintenance. Hair is cleaned, braided, picked through. Skin is checked, dirt is removed. Parasites are found and crushed. Hands trace scalps and shoulders with a familiarity deeper than speech. This is hygiene. Yes, it is also reassurance. It says, I am paying attention to your body because your body matters in the circle we share. Decoration grows naturally out of that same closeness. Pigment may be mixed. Ochre stains fingers. Beads are restrung. Shells click softly. Teeth, bone pieces, perforated stones, carved pendants, or carefully shaped ornaments are worn not because hunger has vanished, but because identity never waits for perfect security. To decorate the body is to say something without words. I belong. I remember. I have traveled. I was given this. I made this. I mourn. I celebrate. I desire to be seen. Symbol comes early in human life because the body is the first surface on which culture writes itself. And then music, one of the oldest human arts, perhaps as old in feeling as language itself, though material proof catches only what survives. A hollow bone with holes, a flute shape, rhythmic wear, a stretched hide over something that once resonated, wood and skin, and voice leave fewer traces than stone, but it would be astonishing if people this emotionally and socially complex lived without patterned sound. Rhythm lives too naturally in work, in heartbeats, in footsteps, in breath, in the repeated strike of one object against another. Music does not require a concert hall, it requires repetition felt together. Imagine evening falling. Someone taps a beat on wood or bone, another joins with hand claps or voice, a child copies, a low hum becomes a call, the call becomes a phrase, others answer. Soon the group is breathing together in time. Bodies sway, feet mark ground. The fire turns movement into flickering shadow theater against hide wall, stone, face, or open air. What does music do in such a world? It strengthens the group without argument. It lets tension dissolve into shared rhythm. It teaches pattern. It carries story. It alters mood. It makes memory easier. It turns many nervous systems into something closer to one. That last point may be the deepest. In fragile communities, synchronized feeling is not ornamental. It is a form of cohesion. People who sing together, dance together, and repeat stories together are building trust below the level of conscious theory. Stories may be the greatest technology of all, after labor, after food, after the first softening of the body. Someone begins. Sometimes it is an elder, sometimes merely the best teller in the group, sometimes a person whose authority in narrative exceeds their authority in anything else. The story may concern real events: the flood year, the almost lost child, the great hunt, the stranger who arrived with news, the fire that nearly escaped, or it may move into the mythic, trickster animals, ancestor journeys, stars with names, spirits attached to ridge, river, or cave, beings that punish greed or reward patience. The boundary between practical instruction and enchantment is not always sharp, nor need it be. A story can teach where good water lies and also why that place must be treated with respect. It can warn children against wandering while simultaneously explaining the world through imagination. In societies without writing, story is archive. It carries resource maps, moral codes, kinship memory, danger signals, seasonal knowledge, and group identity. A tale told slowly over many evenings may preserve more usable information than later people assume. And because it is wrapped in emotion, repetition, and image, it lasts. The child who forgets a list may remember a dramatic scene forever. Leisure, then, is not opposed to survival. It is braided into it. The song is pleasure and cohesion. The story is beauty and storage. The dance is joy and synchronization. The ornament is identity and affiliation. The game is amusement and rehearsal. The quiet sitting together after work is both rest and surveillance of social temperature, or who is angry, who is grieving, who needs coaxing back into the circle, who feels excluded, who is being admired. Even simple silence matters. A modern person left without stimulation often feels deprivation. In the prehistoric evening, silence is textured, fire speaks, wind moves through reeds or leaves, night insects pulse, water can be heard, animals call at distances interpretable to practiced ears. People sit inside that soundscape not as boredom victims, but as participants. A person may stare at coals, clouds, stars, or shadow, and far from doing nothing. They may be thinking, remembering, recovering, noticing. Unstructured time is not absence, it is mental range. That may be one of the things many modern lives have lost most completely. Not comfort, not technology, but unbroken stretches of shared presence without demands of clock, market, notification, or institutional schedule. People 10,000 years ago had danger in abundance, but they also often had forms of time we rarely touch now: lingering time, watching time, story time, the slow drift after labor when the body is spent enough to rest and the mind is free enough to expand. And in that expansion, art emerges naturally: a line on a wall, a carved pattern, a bead shaped a little more carefully than needed, a figurine or charm kept close, a body painted before ritual or for sheer adornment. Humans do not need surplus empires before they begin making things unnecessary and meaningful. They begin as soon as they are human. So when we imagine prehistoric life only as hardship, we make two mistakes at once. We underestimate the hardship because real hardship is more subtle and continuous than spectacle suggests. And we underestimate the richness because humans under pressure are still humans. They still laugh at each other's mistakes, still comfort frightened children, still compete playfully, still find one person's voice especially good in the firelight, still shape beauty out of tooth, shell, pigment, bone, and rhythm. And because beauty and story so often lead toward meaning, toward the question of what the world is, and what the dead become, and what powers move beneath what can be seen, the night gradually opens into another domain of early human life: the hidden one, the symbolic one, the realm of spirits, ancestors, ritual, and the unseen weight of death. A world like this does not remain merely practical for long. How could it? The storm comes too suddenly. The child recovers when everyone thought the child would die. The hunter misses 3 times and then strikes once, cleanly. The river rises in the night. A dream feels more real than morning. Someone who laughed at dusk is a body by sunrise. The animals disappear from one valley and flood another. The same moon changes shape and returns. The stars keep their positions with impossible patience. The dead stay present in memory long after their bodies are gone. A species as symbol hungry as ours could not move through such a world without building meanings around it. And by 10,000 years ago, it is clear that human beings had already been doing so for a very long time. That does not mean a single religion. It does not mean priests in later robes or doctrines written down. It means something deeper and older. A world felt to be alive with significance. Certain places matter. Certain animals matter. Certain gestures matter. Certain colors, objects, directions, sounds, times of year, and patterns of sky matter. A cave is not only stone. A spring is not only water. A mountain ridge is not only a route marker. A burial place is not only ground. Meaning gathers where memory and vulnerability meet. So imagine night after work, after food, after the first stories of the day, when the mood shifts toward what cannot be checked or carried. Someone mentions a dream. Dreams may not be dismissed as meaningless noise the way some modern habits encourage. They may be warning, message, visitation, residue of the dead, or map to something not yet visible. Another person points toward the star pattern. Someone else speaks of an animal encountered alone in an unusual place, and the event is treated not merely as chance but as sign. This is not stupidity, it is pattern making under existential pressure. And the world gives plenty of patterns to work with. Consider death first, because death sharpens symbol more than anything else. When someone dies in a small community, the body does not disappear into institutional handling. It remains among the living until the living decide what must be done. That means touching, washing perhaps, arranging, carrying, digging, speaking, withholding speech, watching children's faces, deciding which objects go with the dead, deciding where the dead belong. Burial practices vary widely across time and place, but one thing is clear: many prehistoric communities treated the dead with intention. Bodies might be placed curled, laid carefully, dusted with pigment, accompanied by tools, beads, or valued objects. Such actions say more than we had to dispose of a corpse. They say the body remained socially meaningful even after breath left it. The grave, then, is a conversation between love, fear, memory, and cosmology. Why place ochre with the dead unless color means something? Why place goods unless some relation is imagined beyond immediate utility? Why return to burial places unless place itself now links living and dead? Perhaps people believe the dead traveled. Perhaps they transformed. Perhaps they lingered. Perhaps they watched. Perhaps ritual was less about exact metaphysical theory than about maintaining right relations with absence. We do not need precise doctrine to see that death had become more than biology. And because death was near in such lives, childbirth, infection, injury, weather, animal attack, accident, age, these rituals were not rare abstractions. They were part of community memory. The dead also remain socially present through story. Your grandfather once, your sister used to, when she was alive. In a society without written names on durable monuments, the continued life of the dead depends on telling. This may be one reason storytelling carries such emotional charge. It does not only preserve practical knowledge, it preserves personhood. Ritual likely extends far beyond burial. A hunt may be preceded by gesture, paint, words, song, silence, taboo, or bodily marking. A place of unusual rock formation, echo, darkness, or spring water may become a place where ordinary behavior softens into something more careful. Specialists may emerge, not specialists in the bureaucratic later sense, but people whose temperaments, dreams, voices, or unusual experiences make them mediators between the visible and invisible. The later term, shaman, is imperfect and regionally loaded, but the broader possibility is plausible. Certain individuals entering trance, leading song, interpreting dream, healing through plant knowledge plus performance, guiding the group through thresholds of fear and grief. Rhythm helps here. So does darkness. So does cave space, echo, firelight, fasting, repetition, and the way intense attention alters consciousness. We should never assume every prehistoric symbolic act was solemn or ecstatic, but neither should we flatten ancient spirituality into decorative superstition, shared altered states, through drumming, dancing, prolonged chant, sleep deprivation, pain, grief, or sheer collective intensity. Are human possibilities older than agriculture? A world of firelit nights, caves, stars, and raw danger may have made such states feel not unusual but essential. Animal meaning belongs here too. Animals are never just calories in such cosmologies. They are rivals, teachers, warnings, kin of a different order, powerful others whose lives overlap human fate. A deer may be admired for grace, a predator feared and respected, a bird read as messenger, a snake marked as transformation, a scavenger associated with death or cleaning, a dog as threshold creature between camp and wildness. Myth grows naturally from dependence and observation. The animal that feeds you becomes morally charged. The animal that stalks you becomes spiritually charged. The animal that appears in dreams becomes symbol. This is why prehistoric imagery so often centers animals, bodies, signs, and repeated motifs rather than straightforward practical scenes alone. Humans are not merely depicting the world, they are trying to inhabit its deeper grammar. And place matters enormously in this symbolic world. Some places accumulate ritual by repeated use, a cave mouth where births, stories, and storms were all witnessed, a deep chamber where sound behaves strangely and firelight makes painted forms seem to move, a hill where the dead are remembered, a spring that never failed, a tower or communal structure around which labor and ceremony intertwined. Once communities begin staying longer in one area, sacred geography intensifies. The land is no longer only seasonal resource, it becomes biography, and biography invites sanctity. One can imagine evenings in which ordinary conversation gradually yields to more formal acts. Pigment applied, bodies arranged, silence requested. A song begun differently from work. Song. A child warned not to interrupt. A sick person brought near. A charm touched. A carved object displayed. The whole community leaning inward towards something they cannot fully explain but all feel. In such moments, human beings become more than a cluster solving practical problems. They become interpreters of existence. That need has never gone away. Only the symbols change. What 10,000 years ago reveals is how early and how powerfully the need was already woven into daily life. There was no secular prehistoric age waiting for religion to be invented later. Practical and symbolic life were already braided. You ground grain and honored the dead. You scraped hides and watched the moon. You repaired a spear and worried about a dream. You carried water and felt a place was somehow not ordinary. You fed the child and wondered where the child's grandmother had gone after burial. You read tracks and you read omens. To modern minds, trained to separate utility from meaning, this can look confusing. To the people living it, it likely felt natural, because the world itself refused clean boundaries. A storm could kill, a story could save, a ritual could steady a grieving group enough to continue. A burial could remind the young that life did not end as waste. A painted wall or sacred object could hold memory more forcefully than speech alone. Meaning was not luxury. Meaning was infrastructure for minds living close to uncertainty. And after ritual, after mourning, after song or trance or quiet remembrance, the night still returns to ordinary things. Someone yawns, someone stirs the fire, someone carries a sleeping child. The person who led the chant also needs water. The mourner still needs to eat. The sacred and the practical fold back together because in human life they were never fully apart. Soon the fire burns lower, the social circle draws tighter. Outside the visible edge, darkness waits with animal eyes, wind, and everything still unknown, which brings us to the final shape of the day, the return to coals, shared food, sleep, and the narrow ring of safety human beings made for themselves night after night under a sky too large to master. By late day, the world begins to contract, not because it has become smaller, but because darkness changes what can be trusted. The distance you crossed in morning light now feels longer. The path that seemed readable at noon begins to flatten into shadow. Water darkens, ground loses detail, sounds travel strangely, wind carries uncertainty, animals that were silent in heat begin to stir with intention. For people living 10,000 years ago, sunset is not only beautiful, it is instruction. Finish what can be finished, bring in what must be brought in, return. And so people do. Loads come back first, roots, reeds, fish, shellfish, bundles of gathered plants, perhaps game, perhaps firewood, perhaps only tools and tired bodies. Children drift inward from the edges of camp or the open spaces around houses. Dogs or proto-dogs circle or settle. Someone checks the fire, someone else increases it. The ring of warmth and light becomes again the center around which all remaining human activity organizes itself. There is relief in this contraction. No matter how demanding the day has been, no matter whether the hunt succeeded or failed, whether the roots were plentiful or thin, whether the walls needed more repair than expected, or the child cried all afternoon, night offers one simple victory. We are back together. The fire at night is not the same as the fire at dawn. Morning fire is recovery. Night fire is defense, comfort, theater, and memory all at once. By it, the last food of the day is finished. Meat is roasted or rewarmed. Roots are turned in ash. Broth or softened grain may be shared where such foods are part of life. Bones are cracked for marrow if there are bones to crack. Grease is savored. Hunger relaxes not into fullness always, but into enoughness, and enoughness is one of the great emotional thresholds of early human life. It lets conversation change. It lets bodies loosen. It allows for gratitude, teasing, story, desire, even silence without sharpness. Distribution at the evening meal matters greatly. Who receives what? Who is fed first? Whether the successful hunter keeps too much or gives according to custom, whether the frail elder receives choice portion, whether children are watched carefully near coals and sharp bone fragments, whether someone short of luck is quietly included without humiliation. Evening food is moral drama in small form. It reveals the group to itself. At the same time, the camp or settlement is physically preparing for vulnerability. Weapons are placed within reach. Fuel is arranged for lighter tending. Sleeping surfaces are checked. Perhaps thorn barriers or cleared approaches around camp are considered. Perhaps the built walls and thresholds of a settlement are reassuring in ways open camps cannot match. The walls create their own illusion of permanence. No matter how solid the structure, night always reminds people that human safety is made, not guaranteed. This is where dogs begin to matter even more. If dogs are present, curled at the edge of warmth, lifting their heads to scents and sounds beyond human range, they form part of a layered alarm system. A growl in darkness means something. So does a sudden stillness. If wolves once hovered as competitors at the margins of camp, some of their descendants now hover as partners within it. Their bodies bring heat. Their hearing stretches the camp's awareness. Their loyalty, once earned, becomes one of the earliest interspecies treaties in human history. Then comes the slow settling. Beds in this world are not decorative furniture. They are solutions to cold, damp parasites and fatigue. Mats, grasses, leaves, skins, raised platforms, if present, all represent effort already spent to make night survivable. To lie directly on bare ground whenever it can be avoided is to give your warmth away. So sleeping places are maintained and renewed as carefully as tools. A familiar spot matters. A child tucked beside a parent or trusted adult matters. The arrangement of bodies around the fire or within a dwelling maps affection, status, convenience, and protection without anyone needing to narrate it. Before sleep fully arrives, there is often a last widening of thought. This is when stories lengthen, not the quick stories of afternoon, but the slow ones, the story everyone already knows but wants again, the story of the near disaster, the story of the ancestor who did not panic, the story of the place beyond the ridge, the story of how some animal got its shape, or how some star found its place in the sky, the story of the one who died, and the sign that came after. A story may take many evenings to finish if the teller chooses. Time at night can stretch in a way daytime never allows. Children fight sleep for one more part. Adults pretend not to notice because they remember doing the same. The fire crackles low. Sparks rise like brief, false stars. Somewhere in the telling, the day's hardships are transformed. The aching shoulder becomes a joke. The failed hunt becomes a lesson. The fright at the river becomes a scene retold with new dignity. This is one of story's quiet miracles. It changes the emotional texture of labor without erasing labor itself. It gives shape to what would otherwise remain mere strain. And then gradually the camp crosses over. One person lies down while still half listening. Another mutters a last remark and closes their eyes. A child collapses sideways against a sleeping adult. The storyteller's voice slows, then stops. Someone whose duty or temperament makes them a lighter sleeper remains upright a little longer, tending the last needed adjustments to the coals. Outside, the dark world continues in full. Predators move, water moves, insects pulse, wind shifts. Clouds cover stars or reveal them. Somewhere, another human group may also be settling, unknown and far, under the same moon. This is the remarkable thing. For all the fragility of these lives, night also contains profound security. Not absolute safety, never that, but enough. Enough because the fire is alive. Enough because kin are near. Enough because the dogs heard nothing urgent. Enough because the food held for another day. Enough because the wall stood, or the shelter held, or the camp remains dry. Enough because grief has been shared. Enough because the child stopped crying. Enough because tomorrow, while uncertain, has not yet arrived. That feeling, the narrow ring of human-made safety in a dangerous world, Mandy, may be one of the deepest inheritances our species carries. Even now, in houses with locks and glass and electric light, many people still crave some version of it. Warmth, known voices nearby, a final story, the sense that nothing more must be done tonight. The prehistoric camp is far away from us in material culture, but not in nervous structure. We are still built for circles of trust in the dark. So what was life like for the average human 10,000 years ago? There was no single average. Some woke in camps that would be gone in days. Some woke in settlements already heavy with the future. Some lived from shellfish and fish, some from roots and seeds, some from hunted meat, most from mixtures the land allowed. Some moved often, some stayed, some did both. Some knew walls, some knew only repeated campsites and remembered routes, but across all that variation, a common rhythm emerges. Wake to cold and hunger, tend the fire, read the day, work with hands, feet, memory, and others, carry food or return without it, repair what breaks, teach the young by nearness, depend on elders, share enough to remain a group, sing or joke or tell stories when the labor loosens its grip, bury the dead with care, fear the dark but meet it together, sleep near warmth, wake again. That rhythm is older than history and closer to us than it first appears, because even now, beneath the noise of schedules and screens and cities, the same old human needs remain strangely intact. To belong to a circle, to trust that someone will notice if you do not return, to eat enough, to rest without fear, to make something beautiful that was not strictly necessary, to turn a day of labor into a night of meaning, to feel, if only for a little while, that the people around you are your shelter as much as any wall. 10,000 years ago, human beings stood on a threshold, 1 foot in the vast wandering life that had shaped them for ages, 1 foot on the ground that would later hold farms, towns, property, hierarchy, written memory, and all the burdens and powers of settled civilization. They did not know where that threshold led. They only knew morning would come. The fire would need tending. The children would wake. The day would ask again for skill, patience, courage, and company. And when night returned, as it always did, they would gather what safety they could out of flame, food, story, and each other, making, in the dark, the oldest home our species has ever known,